New woodworkers are often faced with an overwhelming sense of self-doubt when they see huge, elaborate build videos that make success seem almost impossible. But in this video, we're going to take it from here to learn some of the basics and to have some fun. Here are 4 small projects you can do in one day to give to friends. Even in this age of deeply divided politics, I think we can all agree there's nothing more Etsy than turning pallet wood into garbage tchotchkes to sell for the holidays. But I think I can actually do one better. I can take fancy hardwood that was headed for the garbage and turn it into pallets to gift for the holidays. This is a great project to use flawed material for because it's all going to get cut up into a bunch of small pieces so we can work around all those defects and make the most of the good parts. Besides the huge crack on one end, there's a streak of sapwood down one side and a knot right in the middle of the board. So, in the great tradition of our woodworking forefathers, let's turn a big piece of wood into smaller pieces of wood. By the way, make these out of whatever you have. Pine or oak, that's okay I guess, but it's a little too on the nose for me because, well, that's what real pallets are made from. You see, when you gift these to your friends who use pallet wood, you want them to feel appreciated, but you also want them to know you have better taste in everything, including wood. Okay, with the board now defect-free, I can do the sensible thing and cut it into dozens of tiny strips. And the safest way to do this is with a thin rip jig on my table saw. You really don't want to be cutting something this small against the fence. At best, you'll get a lot of burn marks on your wood, and at worst, you'll experience the thrill of having a wooden missile zipping uncomfortably close to your future prospects. Instead, cut them on the outside of the blade. You'll get really accurate, repeatable cuts without the stress and skid marks. The boards I'm cutting are 3/4 inches thick and I'm aiming for 1/4 inch thin strips. And some of them will get cut to 3/8 of an inch thick. Cut 2 of these for every 7 of the 1/4 inch strips. Now, I need to chop all those strips up at the miter saw, but first I need to go on a little side quest. You see, if I were to cut strips this small against the stock fence, I'd get a ton of blowout and really mangle these up. To fix that, I'm going to make a really simple zero clearance fence. I cut a piece of MDF slightly larger than the width of the miter saw's base, and that almost covers the base from front to back. And I cut another piece that's the same length for the fence. I did my best to center the base on the saw so it overhangs both sides by about 1 inch, and then I used CA glue to add some strips which hug the sides of the saw. That way the base always registers in the same spot every time I want to use it and there's no wiggle. I used CA glue again to attach the back fence, then I tacked the cleats in place with brad nails and screwed the back fence in place for added strength. Always make sure to avoid placing a screw near the center where the blade's going to cut through. I put the fence in place and then with my depth stop engaged on the saw, I cut the kerf line. The depth stop is key. You don't want to cut all the way through the base of this fence, just the back fence. And with a stop block taped to the fence, I'm ready to make safe and clean cuts on all these thin strips. These are all going to be cut to 4 inches long, and each pallet will need 7 1/4 inch strips and 2 of the 3/8 inch strips to be the runners. And I'm aiming here to make enough for 6 pallets. To assemble these, I'm just using CA glue to get all these small parts fixed into place. And if you're still wondering what I'm making here, I told you earlier, I'm making a pallet. Well, a miniature one at least, that you can set your drink on. All I have to do is set these pieces here like this, then glue these here, add more strips on top. Ah, nailed it. Almost. There's got to be a better way. Hold on. Ladies and gents, I give you the Palletizer 5000. Now I can just slide these in here like this, add glue, and butt my runners against this tiny little fence. Now I can add the top layer using the Palletizer 5000's patented spacers. Ah, that's way better. But something still isn't quite right. Oh yeah, no pallet's complete without lots of nail holes. Now that is a handcrafted pallet. All that's left to do now is lovingly hand sand each little pallet so that I can call these handmade, which is key because you can charge like 3 times as much for those. Then the cherry on top, a quick spritz of rattle can lacquer. Ah, nothing says class like a spritz of rattle can lacquer. And by class, I mean high school shop class. Now, your friends have a place to set their favorite beverage and you got to use some scrap wood. That's winning. Speaking of tasty beverage, have you ever been invited to that holiday party where you get the sneaky last-minute email from the host saying it's BYOB? You know, I bet it's your pallet wood friend. Always so cheap, as if you're not already bringing your sparkling personality. But hey, if you roll up to the party with one of these bespoke wooden beer totes, not only will you look prepared, but people will say, hey, how do I get one of those? Now you can turn that negative into a positive. To make this caddy, I'm using a strip of 5/8 inch ply. Why 5/8? Well, because that's what I had in the back. Quit asking so many questions. But before I could make my first cut, I needed to find out how big the inside needed to be, so I grabbed a couple of examples to figure out the footprint of a bottle and a can because, you know, sometimes your favorite beer comes in a can. Once I know that number, I can figure out how much space is needed for a 6-pack, factoring in spaces for the dividers. A good size to start with is 8.5 by 5.5, but please do your own research to make sure that your favorite bottles are going to fit. And if you happen to drink one while you're doing the math, I won't tell. Now with measurements in hand, I can start cutting my plywood. For my parts, I need a base and then 2 short sides, which are going to attach like this, then 2 tall sides, which are going to go on the outside like this. These may look a little too tall at first glance, but just grab one of your bottles and check it for reference. You want roughly 2 inches sticking up above the bottles, depending on how sausage-like your fingers are. Next, I need to taper the sides into that classic beer tote look. I'm leaving a little bit above where the sides of the tote are going to be just to create a nice little shoulder, which you'll see when we get there. These tapers cut pretty easily at the miter saw. Just line up the blade with the taper, or even better, get a saw with a fancy laser on it so that you can make it even easier. Now is also a good time to drill some holes for the handle. Doing this before you add the tapers would be easier, but hey, I'm building this with no plan, so just do as I say, not as I do. Okay, now that all my parts are cut, now's the perfect time to sand everything smooth. I'm also rounding over all the edges and sharp corners because the last thing I want is to reach for a cold one and pull back a mangled hand. Okay, assembly could not be easier. I just added some glue to the base and then I'm fastening everything with brad nails. You could get fancy and use exposed dowels or screws with contrasting plugs or even dovetails. Just calculate how pretentious you want your friends to think you are and go with that method. Now with the outside done, I can figure out the inside. For the interior dividers, I'm using 1/4 inch Baltic birch ply, and to make this easy, I'm just dividing the longer center divider into thirds. That's where I'm going to be placing some notches that are just wide enough to fit around the 1/4 inch ply. And I'm only cutting those notches halfway through, and if you do the same thing on the short dividers, they're going to overlap and lock together like this. And that just slides right in, and now I have 6 little holding cells. The last thing to do is tap that handle about halfway in, add some glue, and then tap it home. Now just load it up and head on your merry way. And if you want to be extra clever, slap on a bottle opener. And hey, when the party's over, just leave your tote behind as a gift for the host, along with a thoughtful note of appreciation. And you know what pairs well with a tasty beverage? Chomps, the sponsor of this video. I absolutely love Chomps. I've been eating them for a long time, and they're like the perfect thing. Because sometimes I get so busy working in the shop that I just forget to stop and eat lunch. And instead of eating empty calories like candy and chips, I get like 0 sugar, 10 grams of protein, and like 1,000,000 grams of happiness in each stick. They're perfect to carry around. Heck, you can eat them without using your hands. How awesome is that? And also easy to stash all over the shop. Oh, here's a good spot. See, because they're long and skinny. Like the drawer. Hey, did you know that Chomps are really high in magnetism? No? That's because they're not. I use tape. That's where I keep my shorties. And these are great outside the shop too. If I'm going on a road trip, I throw some in my truck. My kids take them in their lunch. Actually, my favorite is the jalapeno because I like the heat, but the original beef stick is a winner also. And they've got taco flavor, they've got turkey, they've got Italian beef. Do you guys like these? If so, leave me a comment down below. Let me know which flavor is your favorite. And if you've never tried these before, check them out. There's a link right down there in the description. There really is no better snack for the shop. If you or someone you love is one of these 66% of Americans who like taking care of houseplants and can never seem to stop buying new ones, well then this next project is going to make a perfect gift. You see, recently I learned about propagation, which I admit at first sounded a little dirty. Turns out super boring. You see, the TLDR version is that you hack off part of an adult plant, put it in a jar of water, and it turns into a new plant. Which, by the way, woodworkers, I already checked, this will not work on your walnut lumber, and it will not work if you cut off your finger. For this project, I'm using some more of my Misfit lumber. I have this piece of white oak that kind of took the white part a little too seriously. This is going to serve as my backing material since it mostly won't be seen. I cut this down to about 4.5 inches wide by 30 inches long, and then I ran it through the planer a couple of times just to get it to around 1/2 inch thick. Now I'm cutting some more thin strips just like on the pallet project, but this time I'm using white oak with a little more color on it. Again, just use whatever lumber you have. The point of these projects is to use your scraps. I'll cut those strips down to 10 inches in length back at the miter saw using my new zero clearance miter fence. I honestly don't know what took me so long to make one of these. It's just so handy and makes these cuts so much safer. Next, I'm going to use my mini router table to round over 2 of the edges, and these are going to be on the show face. And if you're interested, I do have plans and a video showing how to make this router table. It's perfect for small shops or for working on small projects. Now I'm gonna glue these little strips onto the backer board. CA glue should work just fine here and be faster, but I went with trim wood glue that's stronger and still sets up pretty quickly. I'm using the same spacers that I used on the pallet project to create gaps in between each one of the strips. That gap is going to be just wide enough to get a glimpse of the underlying lighter colored white oak. This would also look great if you use something like walnut strips on a maple backer for even more contrast. And here's a pro tip: if you get any squeeze out between the slats, just cut a 45-degree angle on a straw and scrape the glue right out. And when I'm all done gluing, I did end up with just a small bit of exposed edge, which is what I planned on because I wanted a little bit of slop in there just in case my measurements were off. And I did it that way so when everything dries, I can just zip on over to the table saw and trim everything up nice and flush. All right, with everything trimmed up, I'm gonna cut a dado across the face of this piece, going about 3/4 of the way through. I'm making the groove about 2/3 of the way up from the bottom, or stated another way, 1/3 from the top. The dado needs to be just wide enough for a friction fit on this small block. And on that small block, I drilled out a 1.5 inch hole, which took longer than it should have because my screw clamp was blocking my dust collection. Then I can turn that hole into a slot at the bandsaw. Just zip down one side, then the other. Now I have a real simple locking shelf for these little glass jars. Oh, isn't that so adorable? A little more routing to soften up the edges and make it more plant-like? I don't know. And then finish it off with some more of that fine spray lacquer. So to mount these, I actually came up with 2 different options. The first one is a keyhole slot in the back so that you can hang this on a wall, or this little base with 2 dowels in it that correspond to 2 holes in the bottom, so now you can sit it on your desk and happily stare at your plant while it propagates. All right, well, this last project is gonna be super fun. Not only do you get to use your scraps, but there are literally no rules. You can go in any direction that you want with this one. For this project, I'm rating the scrap bins hard, and for that matter, any other piles of wood that are laying around. Variety is the spice of life and of this project. All right, so I have rated my offcut bin and come up with a number of boards which I think look interesting. Now, I'm obviously not going to use all of this material in this one project. What I'm really interested in is the end of the lumber. What I'm going for with this piece is something that looks like a roughly stacked pile of lumber. So I have material that varies in thickness and width, different colors of the grain, different patterns in the grain. Some boards have rough ends, some are cut smooth. That's what I'm going for here, is just a ton of different variety. And with my vision clearly laid out, I start cutting. I'm aiming to make each piece I cut somewhere between 1/2 inch and 1 inch thick to create some depth in the final piece. Again, I'm going for a roughly stacked pile of lumber. And a couple of pieces are going to be extra long, and these are going to serve as little shelves. And with the massacre complete, let me lay out how this is going to go. All right, so I've got all my pieces cut, my glue's ready to go, and I've got a piece of 1/2 inch ply that I'm gonna be using as the backer board. Now, the piece that I saw that I'm referencing was roughly 24 inches wide by 36 high, but for the sake of time and sanity, the one I'm gonna be making is quite a bit smaller than that, just to demonstrate the principle of how to put one of these together. On the backer board, I've drawn center lines both horizontally and vertically to keep me centered on the piece because we're going to be building this inside out. And I've also added a couple lines where I expect to put longer pieces that can be used as shelves. To build this, I'm going to start in the center of the backer board and work my way outward. This establishes a level line in the center of the piece and gives me a reference to build off of in both directions. I'm keeping in mind to vary my layout using pieces of different heights, widths, and depths. See, there's going to be little gaps and cracks. That's fine, because if you were looking at a pile of lumber stacked in an old barn, it would look exactly the same way. I actually found this process to be surprisingly enjoyable, which is surprising because I'm doing this project for the first time and recording it for all of you to see. Yeah, I'm winging this 100%. So I've hit my reference line where I thought I might want a shelf, so I'm just kind of trying to figure out how I want to place this. I've got a piece that kind of goes well here. I might just want to cut that in half so I can use the rest of it somewhere else. Even though I'm sure the glue is going to be more than sufficient here, I did play it safe and added a longer piece under the shelf to provide some support. And notice here how I let the pieces stick out over the edges on each side. That's okay, and that's the reason that I started in the middle and worked my way out. It's easier just to cut these flush on the edges rather than creating some cluster in the middle that I'm going to have to deal with and figure out custom pieces to make fit. And when I get to the end, I'm just going to let this sit here while all that glue dries. All right, well, the glue is all dried here, and because I left a small gap at the bottom, I have access to this plywood edge, which is going to allow me to use my crosscut sled to then go back and cut the sides of this piece completely flush. And you might want to do that if you want to cover up these plywood edges, make like a nice decorative wooden frame to go all the way around this. So for finishing, you have a lot of options. You could do nothing at all and just leave it exactly like this. You could clear coat it, or you could do what I'm going to do, which is attempt to darken it up a little bit by using a mixture of a sealer and a little bit of dark walnut stain. So foam brush, and the technique here is just get it on, because this is all ingrained. This stuff is going to soak right into the wood. I'm not trying to create like any type of a sheen or protective finish on this. I'm just doing it to color the wood and seal it up a little bit, and that's it. You can see already how fast it soaks in on some of the boards, but takes longer on others, and that's okay. I'm just moving along until I get to the end. All right, so with this stuff, we're just gonna let it sit on here for about 5 minutes. Anything that's still wet and pooled on the surface, we're gonna take a rag and just rub it right off and then let it cure. So you can see you still have plenty of color variation in this. It just looks like, you know, your stack of wood has been sitting out. Maybe it's been in the rain, gotten a little soaked, a little bit weathered, a little dirty. Looks nice. For the frame, I went with white oak dyed black with India ink. This is a technique that Jason Bent showed on his channel in one of his videos, and I really like the look, so I'm trying it out here. Once that dries, I mitered the corners and then used glue and pin nails to hold it in place. And I made the frame just thick enough to cover the plywood and some of the wood pieces. I wanted this to look like the stack of lumber was sticking out from the frame to give it that full 3D effect. Now just add some D-hooks or picture wire to the back and you're good to go. Well, I hope you guys had fun with this one. Happy holidays. See you next time.